Inequality is a key driver to gender, race, income, and of course, wealth inequality in South Africa. The salary of a chief executive officer in South Africa can be equivalent to the collective salaries of, and hear this, the salary of a chief executive officer can be equivalent to the collective salaries of 461 black low-income women. And that, of course, is according to Oxfam South Africa's annual Income Inequality Report 2020. The report, which highlights the impact on women especially, says that existing government policies have in fact failed to reduce inequality because macroeconomic policies have entrenched rather than reduce the dominance of a handful of conglomerate businesses. And this amidst a worsening socioeconomic situation, further exacerbated by the coronavirus pandemic. So let's discuss this further with Basani Baloyi, who's the Inequality Program Manager at Oxfam South Africa. Basani, good to speak to you. Welcome to Morning Live once more. Basani, just struggling to hear you there. But of course, you know, just looking at this report, and once again, it makes for very grim reading. And from the 2019 report to this report for 2020, has that situation worsened drastically? How bleak is the inequality gap in South Africa currently?
So I would believe that it would have worsened, especially with the lockdown, that we would have seen deepening levels of inequality. We have an extremely high unemployment rate that has increased, and so to the 30s. And you know, if we look at the extended unemployment rate, expanded unemployment rate, that has increased even further, and that is key in terms of determining wage inequality, because the overall contribution of wage inequality into overall inequality is at over 90%, right? And when we decompose what that is, or when researchers have decomposed what that is, part of that is inequality due to unemployment. And given that we have seen this rise, there definitely would be an increase in inequality, definitely.
So we've heard government over the years talk about this triple threat of poverty, inequality and unemployment. And according to your report, we don't seem to be making any meaningful inroads in terms of eradicating inequality. And you look at some of the add-ons that came about as a result of the coronavirus pandemic, which has no doubt exponentially worsened things given the already dire situation we saw in last year's report. You know, how has that actually pushed things further?
So, I mean, for instance, I mean, the thing is, we talk about how our economy can be likened to a caste system. Right, insofar as you enter into this world and you're basically within that space. So 9 out of 10 South Africans earnings are determined by what their parents earned. A person raised by top earning parents is 70% more likely to be a top earner when entering the labor market. And households headed by black women are left to basically carry this burden of severe exclusion, because they are more likely to be unemployed, as 4 out of 10 households headed by women are without employment, compared to 2 out of 10 households headed by men. And in addition to this, is that they are more likely to support more people. I mean, we hear about the black tax, and you know, and it falls heavily on black women because they are more likely to support more people, because more than half are actually extended families. When you compare that, for instance, to households headed by black men, it's a quarter. And households headed by black women, they support, it's a fifth of households that would support extended families. And those of white men, it's only 1/10. So Black women-headed households carry this burden while their household expenditures are 7 times less than that of white men, right? White men-headed households, and 4 times less than the expenditures of white women-headed households. So this is exactly the types of, when we talk about the granular of what this actually means, right? And of course, we talk about how policy failures actually are contributing to this failure in actually meeting the needs of Black women and ensuring that they can move up the income scale and Black people just in general.
Speaking of policy failure, Basani, it almost feels as though, we flog the same horse every year when we look at comparisons. For example, this year, when you say, when we look at the point where the average low income total of 461 Black women equals the salary of a CEO in this country. I mean, this doesn't only highlight, a very extreme situation, but also it speaks to the lack of transformation. What are some of... So why are we struggling? What are some of the impediments, some of the hurdles to transformation?
Okay, I mean, the thing is, we have some policies that are in existence that could help matters, right? So, for instance, we have the Employment Equity Act, and in there is Section 27 that is meant to ensure that there's a reduction in the pay gap, right? So we are calling for, and this happens in countries such as Italy, where there's actually a cap on maximum income. What we've been able to do is regulate those who are at the bottom, right? The incomes at the bottom, by ensuring that we have a minimum wage, for instance, to set a floor on the minimum income that you can pay workers. But we haven't done much in terms of regulating the income of those at the top, a maximum income for those at the top. This happens in Italy, for instance, and we have Section 27 of the Employment Act, which is meant to guarantee a measure of equity, right, between the highest paid and the lowest paid employee in any given firm, which should actually include contract workers as well. So our recommendation is that no CEO should make more than 20 times what is paid to their lowest paid employee, as a way of reducing this income gap. I mean, in the report, we quote a statistic that was quoted before around how I believe it is one of the retailers where the income gap between their lowest paid employee and their highest paid is about over 1,000 times over, right? And that to us is something that we need to really think about. Another area is that yes, we can talk about income, right, and talk about the Gini coefficient, but we also have a problem of wealth in this country, and where 10% of the top 10% of the population owns anything between the range of 70 to 90% of the wealth in terms of assets. And we don't have, for instance, a wealth tax that could be used to mobilize funding. We've been experiencing a lot of budget cuts, and we are told that we can't do much to raise enough money in order to meet our development challenges, right? However, there are certain instruments, such as wealth taxes, that are not being utilized as a way of mobilizing the funding in order to get the investments that we need. The point of the matter is that we have had kind of like an investment strike from the private sector for a number of years, and the government is not being commiserate in meeting that challenge in driving public investment to key areas that could help to generate employment. And then on top of which, we have an industrial policy that is, of course, geared towards it gears towards employing people, But what has happened in terms of the governance of incentives is something that needs to be looked at, because much of the incentives are actually being used by companies, and it's actually used by large companies to actually employ more machinery than people, right? And so that is also a problem. And then we also have an industrial policy, for instance, that is not gender sensitive insofar as it targets a lot of male-dominated sectors without thinking about how are women to be either absorbed into those sectors, or where we ensure that where women are, what are we doing to support them? A lot of women are in low-wage service sectors that are, a lot of them in the care economy, for instance, and yet we don't have an industrial policy that actually looks at that in terms of empowering them as well.
Well, Basani, so much we could still talk about, but unfortunately, we don't have the time. But hopefully at some point we will be able to just unpack so much more of this particular report, because it really is scary, the lack of inroads that we are making at this point. And then, of course, as we said earlier, just exacerbated by this pandemic. But thank you so much for your time. Basani Baloyi, Inequality Program Manager at Oxfam, talking to us about their 2020 South Africa Inequality Report. Right, let's just take a quick look at some